Okay, cool. Yeah, thinks we're good. We're good to go here. So, yeah. So, welcome to Sales Intersection. This is where I discuss sales and the unique skill set my guests bring to the evolving profession of sales, creating their own intersection, how they derive meaning. This is episode five with my guest today, the William Wallace of sales, founder of the Sales Rebellion, the hero to the evolution of sales, Dale Dupree. I wanted to research and learn about your value. So this time now I can provide you more with mine. That's actually a quote from you. Just so you know, my niche in the podcast industry, the noise and options, is I try to ask questions that have never been asked and you can't find online, internet wide for the most part, that are appropriate too. So, and I see you all over LinkedIn, and honestly, you've given me more insight and sales acumen and value than in almost any of my historical sales mentors, man. So I want to say thank you for that. And so to start off, I know you have said this 1,000 times and told this story, but just, familiarize my listeners, your background, how you got into sales, how you became William Wallace, and then we can get into the more kind of interesting questions.
Cool. Yeah. So Dale Dupree, leader of the Sales Rebellion. But first, my story starts back in 1984 with my father, Curtis Dupree, who founded his copier firm that year, left the big box store. He was the Dwight Schrute of the copier sales world. And actually he sold paper at one point. That's why we joke about it. Dunder Mifflin Plus. He literally worked for one of the largest copier companies in the state of Florida, and they had a pretty big standing. They were big enough that people knew who they were outside of the state as well too, which was kind of a big deal because a copy machine was, sold by Kodak or Xerox, and that was about it, right? So my father decided that the life that he was being forced into through the culture and environment that the big box store and the corporate world had created for him, that his destiny was better left to the fate of his own hands and his own actions and his own intentionality. And so in 84, he started that business, and I was born a year later with toner running in my blood. And so were my siblings as well too. But I was the only one that decided that the business was going to be something that I came back to, where we all worked in copiers at some point. A matter of fact, it's funny because my uncle Doug ended up owning the company that my father first worked for, that he left to start his business, and all of his daughters worked there as well too. So when I say toner runs in your blood, it truly does when you're part of the family. So I inevitably came back to work for my dad, but first I actually went out and toured in a band. First on Pluto Records. Shout out to Brian Coble, one of my first mentors, the owner of Pluto Records. And what was so great about Brian is that he was somebody that went out and found young and raw talent that was looking for that entrepreneurial next level concept inside of their music walk. And he had done it with bands before us. We saw the evidence of what he was doing and didn't just have to hear from this guy and go oh, this sounds so good. We could literally see what he had done for other bands. And so we knew we were in good hands. And he ended up keeping his word. He helped us get on a Warner Music Group. And, we became distributed all around the world. It was pretty awesome. Did some big tours, played with some massive bands. And then it all ended because of drugs. And that's usually how most bands end. It's a sad thing, but thankfully nobody died. And thankfully the people that were involved in that side of life are flourishing, right? But they're flourishing because we all made hard choices. And one of them for me was to come home and start working and doing sales. And it's not that I didn't want to go back and work for my dad. And it's not that I had a bad relationship with my dad at that, right? You don't need to hear me saying any of those things. But I was a 21 going on 22-year-old kid that just got married, right? And the last thing I wanted to do was go home, right?
Yeah, I got you.
So I ended up coming back working for my father. I spent a lot of time at his firm, 4 years, became his number one sales rep. He sold the business in 2012. I became their number one sales rep overnight within 90 days. And I never left that mantle. I was with them for almost 7 years. I was their VP of sales, 6 years, sorry. I was their VP of sales as well too, before I left and went to the big box store myself. And so you'd sit here and you hear me tell this story and you're like, dude, what is wrong with you? Well, as a rebel, I thought that for sure I could go into a corporate environment and fix it from the inside. And I learned over the course of a year and a half that quite the opposite. It was a very toxic environment, one of the worst places that I worked, without a doubt, even though I worked at 2 places my whole career. But I would assume that most people that came out of that place would say the same thing as well too. The people were fine. The culture sucked, right? And that's kind of the bottom line, is that people over culture is the thing that you have to look at. And because of that, I sat back and said, wait, well, you could fix this from the outside in. And that's when the Sales Rebellion was born. And I know that's probably the longest intro anybody has ever heard about a human being, but my story goes deep, and it's a thick, sludgy swamp, right? There's a lot of in-betweens. There's a lot of crazy stories that I have. And mostly just because I put myself in those situations through intentional action and motive. But at the end of the day, what I do now is I train salespeople to become better people, not better salespeople, but better people. So we start with the root, and we work on their reason. We build their living pipeline. We help them to put people over products, and we move them into becoming a true sales rebel.
It's kind of ironic, because you and, the whole warrior movement is the exact opposite of what you think a copier. It doesn't really come in. It's not a conversation piece. My friends and I don't talk about copiers. No, it's not a sexy thing to talk about. And that, that you made it sexy, is just awesome. So anyway, I wanted to a little spin on the podcast. Instead of, I do want to ask some questions for sure, and I have a lot of them. But when you get asked to when you go to a webinar or a podcast, what's exciting for you to talk about? What would you want to talk about today?
One of the things, and no one's ever asked me that, but it's crazier because I think every time I go on a podcast, I think, I can't wait to talk to the person on the other end. It's typically what I think. And it's not so much, I love telling stories, and mostly because in my mind, what I think of is how can I impact the person that is listening to your podcast that might not know my name, and that might be going through some of my similar struggles, that might have gone through, depression, which led to a suicide attempt, like myself, that have, been married for 13 years and with their wife for 17, and gone through a lot of the same trauma and struggles that me and my wife have fought through and become best friends out of, right? That need to hear from a guy like me every once in a while that they don't have in their circles. I just think bigger picture in general. Yeah. I think about how I can impact more so than how I can promote my business. I could honestly, and I hope it's okay that I say this word, but could give a shit about whether or not somebody ends up coming over and buying coaching or one of our curriculums or any of our products. I care more about the idea of being able to ignite their own rebellion, to light them on fire, done listening to this, and so that they will go out and tackle and take over their own little communities. And not in a weird way either, bro, in a way that leads, from the servant's heart, and that helps to defend people instead of conquer them from a sales perspective.
Yeah, it's not like I know there's one thing for happiness, one piece of thing that you can do for happiness. But for me, awareness, my own awareness really helped me. I went through some years that were, you wouldn't believe, it was 2 years. To give you an example, one, I fell down an 8-story chimney, and it was like 10 of those. Maybe we could have a beer one day. We could trade stories. But what really helped was and I was a guy that if you said meditation to me, it was like nails on a chalkboard, but it turned into not what I wanted anymore. It was what I needed. And so for me, meditation really has brought that, and it made me self-aware that I was having so much anxiety and depression in my life because of these sometimes work environments. And now I'm still in sales. And if I'm in a good environment, I don't have anxiety or depression, and I'm finding value through sales doing this podcast. But that's what I wanted to, to say about that. What, you did door-to-door success. You said I listened to a webinar on YouTube, and if you went to 100 houses, you'd probably have a success rate that's triple anyone else, right? And this is kind of a question I had for Larry Levine, your buddy, on episode 2. Is you're kind of naturally, you could tell, a good human being, some likable character, someone that you'd want to talk to, but for those that are in sales, that maybe that's not the energy they have right away. But they're hard workers, but they're kind of the rogues, the mavericks. What do you advise there?
Yeah. So one of the first things that I would tell folks is, my door-to-door days, what I've realized real quickly was that people are not interested in you walking in the front door. They're interested because they're like, oh God, here comes a sale for our product, right? And then as soon as you say, hey, how are you? Then they start going, you're not demanding things, and so you're not here to buy something. And it's almost just this immediate change of demeanor and perception. And understanding that, first and foremost, you talked about awareness. Awareness of others is a lost art. Situational awareness is a lost art. And most importantly, awareness of ourselves. It's a lost art.
Yeah.
You talked about meditation. I'm born and raised in the church, bro, but I found Jesus on my own. He wasn't forced down my throat. I decided that I wanted to take a spiritual path, and I looked for my truth, and I found Jesus through that whole process. And I'll tell you right now that's one of the biggest things that kept me sane inside of my walk, to be able to connect with my spiritual life, to be able to call on my creator, to be able to ask for help from something bigger than just myself, and to be unashamed about it. Like, there was a band that we used to tour with, and their lyrics were, let the world know that I am yours, and I will never be silenced. And I loved that saying. I wore that on my sleeve every day, to not just from a spiritual perspective, but also in my community. Let this community know that I'm going nowhere, and I will not be silenced inside of it, because I am here to serve it. And when I started to take these more intentional directives from myself that were not selfish, that were about what it was that I could leave behind for people. Even to this day, I still have people calling me and asking me if they can buy a copier from me still, right? Or who would I recommend? Or could I just do one more deal? It's pretty funny. But and I love that. And honestly, it warms me every time. There's so much fulfillment in it. And I don't think, oh man, if I was still in sales, I'd still be making $500,000 selling copiers. I don't think like that, man. I think I'm grateful.
Yeah.
And I think that's what every single person that's out there beating the streets, even beating the phones, needs to be thinking about, is that you need to be grateful for the interactions that you do get to have. And in the process of becoming grateful about that concept, you will realize and recognize that there is a way to not be unwanted, to transcend what people think of you when you do walk through the front door. And 100% it's through experiences, bro. When the copier warrior was born, he was born with a sword in his hand, right? That's what we like to joke about. And by having a prop and deciding this concept of Disney for sales, as we like to say here at the Rebellion, back in 2012, when I made that decision, 2010, by using the crumpled letter, right? One of my fun little techniques that I do.
Yeah.
I've
learned about it. Yeah, read it.
It's fun, bro. We create a 4-letter cadence, and if you walk in and you say, "Hi, I'm so and so. I'm here to speak to Kevin. I'm with this company." As they ask questions, I sell this. Kevin's not coming out, but if you walk in, you're like, "Hey, I got this letter for Kevin. How do I get it to him?" It's a whole different conversation. What kind of letter is it? That's a crumpled letter, right? And the person they're like, "What? It's a what?" And then, open it up, read it. Open it up, read it. Let me know what you think.
Yeah.
Right. Well, isn't it for Kevin? Hey, we won't tell him. Just put it back in when you're done. And when you have some fun, and when you get people on the other end of the talk track that you're giving curious, when you get them curious, bro, when you get them excited, curiosity is the number one ingredient inside of my sales walk. And more salespeople need to talk about it. More sales professionals need to talk about it too, right? It's like a forgotten art, right? But leading with curiosity and becoming very intentional inside of your territory and changing it to a community. Get the words right. If they're not a prospect, they're a human being, right? You got to just start changing your mindset.
And that comes across with you. I mean, you're talking your truth. You're just dropping lines like, yeah, I tried to kill myself. And someone that you just met in 5 minutes, I sometimes say that I do that too, like, oh, well, yeah, one time I fell down a chimneys, 8 stories. And sometimes people, it's not really natural for them to be like, oh, man, that's cool. They're like, whoa, let's take a step back. You did what? But being able to be yourself, and admitting faults. I had some really hard times, and carrying that around, man, it's so much weight on you, letting that go. So anyways, I mean, on the side, that's meditation is the closest thing to I have to religion. And that came after falling down a chimney, because the surgeon or the doctor said you can go down that chimney 100 times and you wouldn't have come out like you did. So that's something I do outside of work. I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. Like, what kind of things do you do when you're not sales focused, that are, for your mental health or hobbies?
Yeah, I live inside of something that I love. The first thing that salespeople have to do is, like, they don't go to get a job as a BDR because they had to get a job as an AE, right? That's a bad mentality. You go to get a job as a BDR because you want to, because you're excited to learn, because you're going to love what you're about to start doing. And then the perks of that come with it, right? If you end up becoming an AE, or you move up into a management role at some point, or a VP status at some point in your career, that's cool. But you've got to start with getting rid of the work-life balance concept. We were not made, whether you believe in God or evolution, bro, you do not believe, and you cannot change my mind about this, that you were created to work from 8 to 5. There is nothing genetically inside of us that drives us to just be like, oh, it's 8 o'clock. It's time to work for the next 8 hours and do nothing but that, except for the lunch that I have to eat because it's mandatory. Like, people have to check out of this mindset that somehow that working is what we were created for. And they have to tap into the idea that the work, because of that, there is no work-life balance, right? Like, you have to enjoy your life. You have to sit back and say, I love what I do. I'm happy with what I do. I'm encouraged by the progress that I'm making for myself. And if you're not making progress, you've got to start to think about ways that you can. Yeah. You've got to have a community around you holding you accountable to those things as well too, because that's what's really going to create and cause the growth that you're looking for in the first place. So for me, it's this concept of, like, what do I do all day to just stay sane and to mentally, or to keep myself in a mental place that's not lurking toward that darkness that I inherently have. Like, not to say that somehow depression is like genetic, but it is a little crazy when you learn about some of the people in your family, right, that have struggled with the same types of feelings, some in the past, some even like right now in the present with you. And so for me, it's this concept of, at the same time, that we're all kind of struggling with this thing to some capacity, like you talked about. And I like how you said, I don't necessarily just sit with somebody, or other people, I should say, don't just necessarily sit with someone and say, yeah, I fell down a chimney and almost died once. But in 2016, and because I am just such an outgoing person, it was natural. But in 2016, when I was giving my father's eulogy, I had a massive awakening that day. I had a transformation in my life and my mindset and the way that I conducted myself as a human, because I looked out into a room where half the people I didn't recognize, in a place that had a 900 person capacity, and there was over 1,000 people, like, lined up against the walls, and they might as well have been standing on each other. It was one of the most intense things that I'd ever looked out at in my life. And to think that the people that were coming up to us afterwards were stating things like, I met you when you were this tall, and like holding their hand down by their waist and saying, your dad rolled my first copier into my office with you. It was intense. Yeah. And so I woke up that day, bro, and I said, it's okay to tell people the things that you have struggled with, or that you are struggling with. It's okay to be very forthright. It's okay to be very transparent. And there is no such thing as oversharing, right? There is definitely an inappropriateness to the way that you conduct how you share your stories and the things that have happened in your life. But there is no such thing as sharing too much information, because as long as what it is that you're doing comes from an altruistic standpoint in regards to educating other people and to trying to become more intimate with them and closer to them inside of a relationship, then it doesn't matter. Because listen, if they don't like what you say, they're not your tribe, and they don't need to be around you to begin with, and you don't need to be around them because it's not healthy.
That's
So it's how you
true.
find the right people.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Once I made a decision to accept all the things that happened to me, and not have shame about it. You know, it's not like I dropped that, let's say on a date pretty early on about the chimney. You know, there's a time and place for it. But you know, just accepting yourself, you know, and speaking about it is powerful, and it takes strength, but it's so liberating, you know. I went through that, and then I realized I made a decision that I'm going to make every day a masterpiece, you know. You know, honor my job, I think is what you said. You had a saying, take honor in that. And you know, as you get older, you realize you're not going to be alive forever. You know, I was living in my 20s and early 30s, you know, just partying like crazy, just acting like life goes on forever, and it doesn't, you know. So as much as I can, you know, I was really inspired by this, you know, that you said that is take honor in your life, you know, and that feels good for yourself and your social network. But so you talk about your dad a lot. Obviously he was a big influence. What gaps were there, you know, and why he was successful, why he was a good person, and what were the most kind of unique gaps?
Yeah, you know, I think the gaps in the beginning, the gaps were, for the most part, it was that we were the same person, right? Like, and that I didn't recognize it, that I felt like he was so much different than me. And I also sat back and watched his success, and I thought to myself, like, I'd do it differently. I would think to myself those things very selfishly. And but really what it was, though, that I didn't realize is that I was thinking that way because I truly deep down inside believed inherently, just as his son and his, you know, him being my hero my whole life, that he deserved more recognition. So, you know, he would do something when the door was closed and nobody would see it. And I'd be like, dude, open the door and tell everybody. I mean, or let me do it. Like, let somebody else do it. And I remember one time we got an award from the Chamber of Commerce in Titusville, Florida. And it was because he donated all this printing for no reason, man. Like, he didn't even have a membership with them. Yeah. He just donated all this at the time, at least. I became an active member and a board member eventually. And my dad influenced those things. You know, I didn't know what any of that even was, what servant leadership looked like from that capacity until my dad taught me. But I remember they sent him this award in the mail. And I was like, why did they send you this? And he said, well, I honestly don't know, but I assume it has something to do with that they asked me to be at the meeting to acknowledge me. And I declined it. I said, I don't want anybody to know what I've done. Like, that doesn't matter to me. I'm just happy to have served you. And so they sent him that plaque instead. And so it was even moments like that where I was starting to see, okay, I get it here. You know, like, we're really, what my dad was finding by being that person was he was finding his real tribe, the people that truly did appreciate and love him, because they were, even in those moments, were respecting that request, right? You know, they were saying, like, all right, well, we're just going to send you something privately then, if that's the case. And hope you feel honored by it, and to put it in your office somewhere. And maybe somebody will ask about it, and then you can tell the story then. But, you know, they never did anything publicly. And I it's romantic to me, that side of it. You know, so for a long time, I think it was more or less the typical father-son relationship to an extent, you know, again, where I would say, I'd do that a little bit differently. But realistically, everything that my dad taught me, everything that my dad did, I loved and I inherited, and I am. You know, I tell people all the time that I walk in his bold shadow, and I don't want to ever leave it either.
Sure.
You know, and so not to say that I not to say that everything I do, I go, what would my dad do, by any means, you know, but I do take his example as one of the indicators for me as to what is right. inside of these decisions, because I know I still have to make my decisions for myself. And that's what my dad allowed me to do. That's how he trained me. That's how he motivated me. That's how he mentored me. Right. Hey, I could teach you all this stuff, or you could just learn it. And guess what? The best part is that if you learn it under me, you get more time. If you learn it out in the world, you're fired in 90 days. But with me, you get a little bit more time. And if you fail, I'll fire you too. But I'll give you time. And time being one of the most important things that we can give to one another, I was grateful. And I am eternally grateful at this stage of my life for the patience he had with me and the things that he allowed me to do, the experimenting with, taking empty donut boxes to people and, telling them on the inside, like writing in Sharpie saying, sorry, I ate these, waiting for you to get back to me. Like those are risks, right? Because I could make the business look bad even, but my dad believed in me, right? And so I would really say that when you look at it at the end of the day, I hope that people see my father in me when they look at my actions and they see what I've carried out.
That's great, man. I'm sorry that did happen, over 2 years ago, but it obviously gave you a ton of value and who you are today. I mean, do you tell the people that come to you for coaching, just you can go crazy until you get a restraining order? Or where do you cross the line? Because you've done some crazy stuff, right? I think you said, yeah.
I was pretty close. I almost got a restraining order one time. It was close, but I just got slapped on the wrist by the security guard instead, which was nice, But we don't want people to risk their livelihood.
Yeah.
But we want people to understand that until you care enough, nobody else will.
Yeah.
Right. Nobody will recognize your existence at that, And so you can't sit back and just say, oh, I've made 25 calls to these people. Eventually, because I've left so many voicemails, they'll get back to me. And yeah, we've all heard the story about, the guy that for 2 years kept calling his buyer, and his buyer finally was like, all right, I'll give you a chance because you're annoying. That's really what the story, how it goes. People tell it differently. They say, well, that's persistence. Like, no, you just annoyed the living shit out of this dude. And so he's going to take your quote now. But where's the quality in that kind of relationship? Like, where is the sense of servant leadership inside of that? How are we causing wonder in our prospect? How are we allowing them to see our true motivation? Because all they hear is dollar signs every time we leave a message for them, right? Sell you something, sell you something, sell you something. So
COVID has obviously changed things because, I mean, you can't do a lot of maybe some of the things you would encourage in the past, right? Is that accurate? Or, I mean,
you can still do them. That, we've seen a drop in responses, but it's the same drop that everybody that is experiencing a drop have seen in their sales in the first place, right? So it's like it all lines up. Yeah, an office is good still. You gotta do recon in the year of COVID. You gotta do recon. You gotta call the 800 number, or the call center, or the front desk that's being forwarded to the cell phone of the poor young woman or the poor young man that they're making answer the phones at home, and without a switchboard, right? Like without any way to get anybody anything, and ask them what's going on. I'm trying to help y'all out. I've got some stuff I've been trying to deliver over to Kevin or over to Stacy, and how can you help me out? How do I find them? Man, I don't even know how to get a hold of them myself. When you start to do that recon and you figure out, like, all right, these 50 people over here, I'm going to have to come back to them after this thing's over.
Yeah.
I can do, right? And then saying, well, okay, so how do I innovate that? How do I find the people that are in their office, that do have a smartphone, instead of a cell phone at their employee's house, that can send, by hitting 9, you over to the guy or girl that you're trying to get in touch with, asking the right questions, being a wanderer inside of your territory right now. That's the thing that's most important, and not just like saying, I dialed their extension and left them another message. They must not be coming to the office. Well, obviously they're not. But the other thing is asking. You get on the phone with the receptionist. Yeah, none of us are coming to the office right now. Well, can I get their cell phone? Because like they can tell me no. I'm not trying to bother them from the perspective of becoming a nuisance. I'm just trying to get in touch with them and see if I can send them the scrumpled letter in the mail, right? Yeah. And I'll tell you right now that unless you ask, you're never going to know the answer. A lot of people say things like, I can't ask that question, or that's not business professional. Business professional is a cop-out.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
real thing.
So, what about like online tools are the way to go, right? Everyone has maybe LinkedIn Navigator or Salesforce or
Yeah.
something. I mean, without using any kind of brands, if you don't want to, what do you think is essential to use online to be effective?
Yeah. Use Lead IQ. I'll tell a brand, use Lead IQ, use Ryan O'Hara and Lead IQ. And that'll give you the information that you need digitally on the people that you're trying to get a hold of. And that's your tool right now during COVID-19, because also we're teaching our reps, our students that we're training, we're teaching them how to do things digitally, how to take the experience that people would have by this thing that you send them through one of our market tools digitally, right? So we've got videos of reps crumpling up pieces of paper and this is a crumpled letter. I want to explain it to you, but you got to get back to me, right? And causing curiosity and becoming fluent inside of a digital world in their outreach and just pivoting in the right way and keeping the same fire, being excited, being willing to do the work. The best part is that you can easily send a whole bunch of videos to a whole bunch of people as direct messaging through their LinkedIn after you get them to add you, and it's going right to their cell phone and they're sitting in bed looking at it, right? I mean, so you should be doing that post-COVID, right? People should be adapting to the way of the world and the way that the future is headed from a digital transformation standpoint, regardless. But the human connection is what people need more than anything. So don't disconnect yourself inside of that outreach. Stay present.
I imagine there's at least some percentage of people that are coming to you that are unemployed, and it's more about interviewing, not getting a sale. What advice would you give for them? Probably there's a lot of similarities and overlap, but what are you advising?
Yeah, we're teaching people non-traditional ways. I'll give a shout out to Justin Wynn, and anybody can find Justin by going through my LinkedIn. He runs a company called Get Show Grind Up, or you can check out Daniel Botero. He has a great book, College to Career. He also is running a great little community around students specifically that are coming out of college and looking for jobs right now. And those guys know what's up. They understand what's happening in the marketplace, what's happening inside of a work environment during COVID, and who's hiring, who's not, and how you're going to get attention, right? So that's the most important thing that you need right now is you need the attention of the person on the other side more than anything else, right? You don't need a badass value proposition as much as you need to be able to show resilience and that you're not in survival mode, you're in thrive mode, and that you know what you're doing and that you have confidence in what you're doing. But we've got students that only a couple that have been laid off so far, but we also have a big community of people as well too. I mean, some of them were even on our happy hour last night talking about leaving jobs. And what we've been encouraging people to do is to use the crumpled letter as a resume. And a lot of them have been doing it. And so imagine that you're sending this same outreach piece that gets in front of a publicly traded company, because that's what our students are getting in front of, to get in front of an HR person. It works. It works wonderfully. And furthermore, it's the risk that some people are looking for. Because again, people say to themselves, and they'll listen to this podcast and they'll go, that's not professional. I couldn't do that. Once again, that's a cop-out. If you don't take risks, if you're not willing to dare mighty things, you will fail. Yeah. It's as simple as that. Or you will find a job and it'll be something you'll think that it's the right fit, but it won't be. Yeah. Because you're just settling, right? You're getting complacent in your walk and you're saying, whatever. Yeah. I'll just go take this job over here. I'll just send a regular resume. Make a digital one. Send video with it. Yeah. Talk to people. Show your authentic side. Step outside of your box.
I mean, in the pie chart of all sales in the U.S., I mean, you are bleeding edge, in terms of your ideas and the way you go about things. And it seems like you're natural for that. What do you, I mean, it seems like, and also naturally you'll continue to be that, but what kind of goals, what do you see, what goals you have 5-10 years from now?
Yeah, man, they're big. I mean, as a company, it's our mission to tear down castles and build a kingdom, and kingdoms are big. So we want to touch
Wallace,
millions.
Like I said.
We want to touch millions of lives. We are already global. I mean, we have multiple countries that we serve students in. But we want to be bigger, and we want to be bigger not from the perspective or the sense of like making a ton of money and becoming so wealthy that we don't even know how to count it anymore. We want wealth that's generational. We want wealth that's altruistic in its form, where we understand that money is important because it's what makes the world go around, but we understand what a legacy is. We know what people truly need in their life in order to thrive. We know what's going to bring fulfillment, what's going to bring happiness, what's going to bring peace, what's going to give people, again, the fulfillment that they desire, and not a sale, right? We want to build a community. We want a place where people can go and they can challenge one another through accountability, through friendship, through camaraderie. We want rebels to rise up all over the world, and not just to become better salespeople, but to connect with themselves, to become self-aware, then to become aware of others, and then aware of situations, and change the world altogether. And we believe, because we believe, just like I said, in the generational concept. So what are we doing for our generation and the next, that we hopefully in the next after them as well, hopefully I'll still be around to serve them to some capacity.
Yeah.
So that they take our teachings, our concepts, our mindsets, and they infect the next generation and the next and the next, and we keep this thing rolling, because so many people have such a short-sighted view, and that's why everybody fails. The rebellion looks long-term.
Great. That's awesome. I want to be respectful to time. So just last question, and it's a bit of a selfish question, but I'm just starting up this podcast and my own kind of site for business or, sales acumen and empower, leadership and growth. What kind of advice would you give me to be, to grow this business podcast?
You know what, dude? Like, the best advice that anybody can give it to any capacity is make sure that every single thing that you do inside of growing and building and hitting these goals and all these milestones that you're trying to, because I'm sure you have some built up, make sure that throughout the process that you're creating fulfillment and happiness for yourself, and that you're not just doing stuff in order to hit the metric that's necessary. Metrics are non-existent inside of happiness. They truly are not. Where if you are in a state of complacency through metrics, you'll never figure out how to get uncomfortable enough to find the success that you want, right? And so be bold, be daring, go out and try to get the biggest names possible on your podcast, right? And not because they're the biggest names, because it's a challenge, right?
Yeah.
And because it's about helping yourself to be able to turn that switch and to say, life is much less complicated than we actually make it to be in the first place.
Sure. Well, hey, Dale, absolutely appreciate you coming on Sales Intersection. You can find this on Spotify, on Anchor, on most platforms, on YouTube, if you want to see the video chat. But it's the website is businesssaleslift.com, and the podcast is Sales Intersection. Dale, do you want to say anything about you want to promote or where you can be found?
Nah, that's okay, bro. If people listening want to find me, just Google Dale Dupree or head to thesalesrebellion.com and come join us.
Yeah, that's great, man. Well, this has been a great use of my time, so I appreciate that, and enjoy the rest of your day. And I really do hope we stay in touch.
You got it, bro.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, man.